Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar book review. This one is going to be the first look at the Avatar The Last Airbender Legacy of the Fire Nation book from Insight Editions. Now if you're wondering immediately, this is December 2019, how do you have this book? The book is not out until February 4th, 2020. Insight Editions got in touch with me and asked if I was interested in kind of getting a kind of early look at the book. I agreed to it, so that's where this book came from. They sent me an early review copy of this book, so just be aware of that. But I think you guys know by now that even when I get review copies of the books, I still give a very honest review of the book. So yes, I have it now here, the third of this type of book from Insight Editions. We of course started off with Avatar Legacy a few years ago. Then just actually a few months ago at this point we got Legend of Korra and Avatar's Chronicle. Now we have this one, the most hyped up one, Legacy of the Fire Nation. So the history of these has basically sort of been that, you know, this was a pretty solid book, some interesting kind of insight into things, some of the best kind of pullouts that we've seen. It was kind of mainly a recap of sort of some information we've seen before, but a few nice insights into things. The Katara page of her letter to Tenzin was actually very nice. A solid start. Unfortunately, in Avatar's Chronicle was probably the weakest. It is definitely the weakest of the three, just because of where they chose to set it, as being more of a just recap of the four books of Korra. It didn't really give them anywhere to go with regards to touching on new information or giving any new ideas. It was still, you know, a fun book, had very good art from Sora Medina. That was definitely the highlight of it. But definitely this one wasn't as good as Legacy. Now, having read Legacy of the Fire Nation, I can definitely say that this is objectively the best of the three books. This kind of feels much more in line with kind of, in a way, what the other two kind of almost like should have been. I'm not going to say that this goes as far as to just reveal all this fascinating new information about Iroh and stuff like that we've never had before. But it definitely approaches that stuff a little bit more. There was definitely a few moments throughout reading this where I was a bit surprised that, oh, they actually revealed that, or they said that thing in that way. That's kind of cool, new, and interesting. But I think the best way to describe the book is just that, in general, because it's narrated by Iroh, everything he touches on has that extra insight, that because he ultimately is that like experienced character, he's an older character as we meet him, the amount of knowledge he has about like the past and the history, anything he talks about, there's a level of depth and wisdom to it that you didn't quite get from, say, Korra in the previous book, like talking about it. So there's just that little bit of extra detail in kind of everything in this book that has gone into. I think the pullouts in this one are also sort of an improvement over the Korra one. I'd probably still maintain that the little pullout kind of notes and stuff like that were probably at their best in Legacy, the first book, but they play a nice role here. You know, you get like a Jasmine Dragon tea shop menu that sort of opens out like this, and you get like, oh, the Appa blend, the red-blooded nephew is actually the name of one of the blends. The White Lotus tile, the Bender tea, the Ba Sing Quan, Metal Brew is one. And there's just this is on the section about like Iroh talking about the Jasmine Dragon. On the other page, he talks about Pai Sho a bit, and this is just a little note with some tips on Pai Sho and some kind of like advice, pieces of advice about Pai Sho, and it's pretty good. You know, the game may have been invented by the spirits themselves. Be careful when using the White Lotus tile; it can be used to send secret signals to an opponent or an ally sitting on the other side of the board. I never play in this part of the board. Bad luck for your old uncle. They're just fun little things like that. One of the things that they have here is there's 3 pages in the book where you get a letter like this. All 3 of them are from Zuko at different stages of his life. So the first one in the book is to Iroh from Zuko age 7. Then you get one more towards the middle of the book, and I think the idea is that it's Zuko in his 20s in or around. just after, they've really founded Republic City, and he sends a letter to Iroh. And then at the very end of the book, there's a letter from Zuko when Zuko's much older. Because one of the fun things that they do towards the end of this book that I didn't expect them to do is to actually cover the idea that, Korra met Iroh, and the idea that, she has seen him a few times, so she brought back a letter to give to Zuko from Iroh in the spirit world. And that's new content that we didn't know happened. It was this mystery that was sort of left open a little bit from the show of Zuko seems shocked that Iroh was in the spirit world, and this book kind of gives a little bit of an insight into some of the details now, that okay, it's now sort of canon that Zuko finds out about this, gets a letter, and kind of, gets a letter into Iroh, that sort of thing. It's just interesting. It's that little bit more depth that you don't quite expect, based on the other two books, you didn't quite expect them to actually do. As for, I suppose, some stuff like the family and stuff like that, we've seen the preview pages and stuff like that. There's some interesting art and so on. You have Iroh talking about his relationship with Ozai, and while it doesn't go incredibly in depth, I think it does a decent job at getting across, just the dynamic, and him talking about, the legacy of the Fire Nation, the history of the family, and that there's always been this kind of undercurrent of, favoritism in different generations of the family. The idea of, Agni Kai's, this jealousy, who's next in line. There's always been that at play. There's even the page here where, we talk about the Roku and Sozin kind of backstory. That section doesn't really reveal anything new, but it gives an opportunity for a lot of very interesting art. There's a section that talks about, Sozin and Azulon, and we get a very interesting piece of art like this, where I think this is a young Azulon being watched over by Sozin, or else it's an... I think that's the way it kind of has to be here, just because or else they're trying to say that this might be what a younger Ozai or Iroh looked like, but I think it's meant to be viewed as this is a picture of sort of Azulon when he was growing up. But that's cool. That's really interesting. We've only seen kind of one look for Azulon, really. I think we also have his portrait, but just seeing a younger version of him. And this is where, once again, it was the highlight of an Avatar's Chronicle, Sora Medina's art here just really, really stands out. The variety of different things that she gets to cover here, where it's not just basically doing the character designs from Korra that we know of for everyone. It's interesting stuff, like a younger portrait of Iroh and Ozai when they were that little bit younger. There's just interesting things like that. Getting to see the portraits of the different Fire Nation, the Fire Lords, and stuff like that. And there's even a little section where he talks about his experience with the Sun Warriors and meeting the dragons Ran and Shaw. It doesn't go, I wouldn't say particularly in depth in terms of what goes on, in that there's still some vagueness about it, and that even he says one was red, one was blue. So there's that still sort of unwillingness to kind of commit to they obviously didn't have the ability to say Ran is red, Shaw is blue, or whichever way you want to see it, because we don't actually know. We've never directly been told which one is which, and Iroh doesn't reveal it here either. So that's pretty cool. There's another pullout that covers some stuff on firebending forms that in the style that we've seen before. The page about the White Lotus is actually pretty interesting as well. Again, don't expect tons of extra information, but they make a kind of unexpected connection that I was very, very happy to see, and there's some nice art as well. Lu Ten does get brought up. Again, did they go particularly in depth? No, but they mention it. He talks about his experience of, his greatest success at the siege, leading to his greatest defeat with the loss of his son and so on. Really good stuff overall. Even stuff like this is where the section fire within the family, between the family, and just the discussing the idea of the fights between the different members of the family and so on. it's really nicely done, and there's a family tree section. I think I showed this off earlier on, and again, it doesn't cover anything more. Like, it doesn't even cover some of the stuff that we kind of knew already, in that, like, we don't see Ela mentioned on the tree here, even though we know about her. But it does feature Jinzook and Rina, and it features a younger Jinzook and Rina. We see Ikem is included on this family tree, as is Kiyi, in an interesting visual here of what seems to be a, like, slightly older Kiyi. I'd say it looks like maybe a 12, 13-year-old Kiyi. And I'll leave that obviously for the actual release of the book for people to check that out. But it's a nice little thing that's in there. Even a page like this, which only really covers basically like the idea of Agni Kais, and it's just Iroh giving his thoughts on like the three Agni Kais we see Zuko take part in: the one against his father, the one against Zhao, and then the one against Azula. And he talks about like how Zuko changed between each of them. It's a really good view of like Iroh on Zuko's arc, and I think it works very well. And then you do have the section we've seen some of in the preview pages of like Iroh goes through the members of Team Avatar and gives his opinions on them, and it's actually very insightful. He gives some sort of surprising descriptions of some of the characters, like say the Sokka page here. Sokka: I never considered sarcasm a natural element until I met Sokka, that is. If what comes out of that boy's mouth is not considered a special type of bending, I don't know what bending is. And it goes on and talks about him a good amount. And then like Aang, he says like, Aang was a puzzle to me for a time, a wayward child one moment, the savior the next, and so on. His description of Katara is very interesting in that like it's super high praise for her. Katara: outside of the Avatar himself, young Katara always struck me as the most powerful, if undisciplined, bender of the age. That is high praise indeed from Iroh, that they're making it sort of a canon statement from Iroh that he views Katara as being the noted bender in a way of that generation. More so than Toph even. That's very interesting to me. But it sort of makes sense. Look how quickly she progressed to being basically one of, if not the best waterbenders in the world. Really highlights that, and the amount of skills covering like the world of waterbending that she had by the end is different than say Pakku. So that was kind of cool to see. And then like you have stuff like this, like the art that got a lot of people excited when we saw some of the preview pages of like older Aang, older Zuko at Republic City. Very, very nice to see. And it's this nice mix of the art is Sora Medina's interpretation of some of the scenes that we've seen from the show, and then some of the stuff that is more new. In that like, let me go back a little bit here. Oh wait, sorry, it's a bit further on actually. Yeah, there's a section where Iroh talks about the members of Team Avatar, and then there's a section where the members of Team Avatar send a letter to Iroh, so you kind of get their kind of views on him. That's pretty nice. But yeah, there's a section on the spirit world, end is like the hope for the future type thing, and I think they do a good job with this book of just like telling a story. And I think that's the biggest praise I can give it. In that, like, say, look there. Look, there's another view of an older Sokka. Like, we've never really seen much of that before. And you have to give this book praise for doing stuff like that when it's almost felt like in many ways they've been like afraid almost to like give us some of that content. Like, when are we ever going to get a story with the adult versions of our Avatar characters? It feels like the comics are an age away from getting towards that stuff, and the more and more we find out about it, the more interesting it seems. And I want to see older Sokka, older Katara, and see what they're, what happened to them at those periods of their life when things were different and so on. So yeah, this is more of a kind of preview style review. I definitely would say that this book did impress me. And that like I didn't give this book especially like a particularly favorable review. I was kind of more like, get it if you're a collector, if you like this style of book, but like it doesn't really have much new information. Same with kind of Avatar Legacy. I was very much kind of like, it's good. There's definitely some nice moments in it, but it's not perhaps what it could be. This one, like, I do have to say, it's much more in line with what I expected when, like, say, this book was first announced. I felt like we were probably going to get something more similar to this than we actually ended up getting with this. But this is good, and it makes me kind of wonder, like, is there going to be a plan for a fourth one of these books covering some other, you know, character or something like that? Because there's definitely some potential. I'd very much like to know some of this stuff, or them to take a different approach, in that they seem to be able to do this sort of encyclopedia style book quite well. So I'd be like, you know, can we get like an Avatar encyclopedia? That is something that I think everyone would really like. A thing that just defines terms. This is the name of this animal. Just long book, you know, big hardcover book, covers all those details, and, you know, it covers the ground it needs to. I think it would be really, really good. If you potentially don't have any more ideas for books like this. But yeah, I definitely recommend this. You know, when the book comes out in February, I do think this one actually, for a lot of fans, will be worth getting. Again, I do want to maintain the idea, though, just that you probably won't be blown away with the amount of information in the book, but know that it sort of surprised me with it having more than I did expect it to. And my expectations after this book were somewhat low, since that book didn't really cover that much. This one actually has a little bit to it. So that was, I think, pretty nice to see, in that, you know, some of the things that are mentioned in the book, when Iroh mentions his trip to the spirit world, it was sort of like, whoa, they actually, like, said something that gives us new information about his trip to the spirit world that we really didn't know before. That I was kind of like, okay, that's fine. It's not a huge reveal, but it's like, it's something new. So yeah, I suppose this is one of those things where, like, this is just an early look at the book. I'll talk more in detail about the book when it's actually out. So expect another video on this on the 4th of February, where I will talk about basically all of the details from this and stuff like that. Whereas, like, with these two books, I actually felt like there was, beyond just the review, there was no real need to, like, cover the content in any other way. With this book, it might actually be worth kind of just doing a video, kind of just going through, like, the kind of reveals that happen in this book, because there are some actual good insights into it. It feels more like some of the guidebook style things you get in other franchises. So that's the good improvement here. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Legacy of the Fire Nation. Again, thank you to Inside Editions for sending me the review copy here, so I could do this video early and kind of get some information about these books. Because I do find with these ones that they do tend to, kind of, people tend to forget that they almost, like, exist, because, like, everyone's focused on the comics and some of the other merchandise, like the Funkos and stuff like that, that people almost do, like, forget that there's these other style books that are out there, and I like to cover them. I've covered all 3 of them, and it's nice to have them in the collection at the very least, if not just for the art that's at play. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that book. But in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.